The G7 summit unfolded against the breathtaking backdrop of the Canadian Rockies, where the natural beauty of the landscape stood in stark contrast to the underlying tension that permeated the gathering. World leaders arrived amid tight security, their faces set with determination, aware that the stakes were higher than ever. This summit was not just another diplomatic event, it was a high-stakes meeting where every gesture and word carried weight. The atmosphere in the room was thick with anticipation, as leaders from the world's most powerful democracies prepared to tackle a host of urgent global issues. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, hosting his first major international summit, faced the daunting task of steering discussions through turbulent waters. The recent imposition of U.S. tariffs on key allies had frayed relationships, and Carney was determined to keep the dialogue constructive, despite the mounting frustrations simmering beneath the surface. President Trump's America First economic policies loomed large over the proceedings. His administration's tariffs and unpredictable approach to alliances had unsettled traditional partners, casting a long shadow over the summit and raising fears about the future of global trade and cooperation. But trade disputes were only part of the story. Escalating conflicts in the Middle East and the ongoing crisis in Ukraine weighed heavily on the agenda, adding layers of complexity and urgency to the talks. The world was watching, hoping for signs of unity in the face of growing instability. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz took a firm stance, calling for a united front to halt Iran's nuclear ambitions and pledging unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself. His words underscored the gravity of the security challenges facing the G7 and the need for coordinated action. Learning from past summits marred by public disagreements, Canada made a strategic decision. Instead of pushing for a traditional joint statement, which risked exposing deep divisions, organizers opted for chair summaries, aiming to keep the focus on dialogue rather than discord. This approach allowed leaders to speak more freely behind closed doors, fostering honest exchanges without the pressure of reaching a forced consensus. The hope was to encourage genuine progress on the most pressing issues, even if unity remained elusive. The agenda was ambitious, spanning trade disputes, security threats, and the rapid rise of artificial intelligence. These topics reflected the shifting landscape of international relations, where technology and geopolitics are increasingly intertwined. Yet, with the U.S. delegation deeply divided from its partners on key issues, the prospect of a unified statement seemed remote. The fractures within the alliance were on full display, raising questions about the G7's ability to present a united front. In the end, Canada's pragmatic leadership sought to prioritize meaningful dialogue over superficial agreement. By focusing on open communication and practical solutions, Carney hoped to guide the summit toward outcomes that, while perhaps not unanimous, could still move the world's democracies forward in uncertain times. Economic conflict dominated the G7 summit, as leaders from the world's most powerful economies gathered to discuss pressing global issues. However, the spotlight was firmly on the escalating trade tensions. The tensions were primarily driven by President Trump's decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, a move that sent shockwaves through international markets and diplomatic circles. These tariffs significantly strained relations with key allies, including the host nation Canada. The diplomatic atmosphere was tense, as leaders grappled with the implications of these trade barriers. The U.S. administration justified the tariffs by citing national security concerns, a rationale that was met with skepticism by many allies who viewed it as a guise for protectionism. Canada, heavily reliant on trade with the United States, faced significant economic threats. The tariffs posed a direct challenge to Canadian industries, particularly those in the steel and aluminum sectors. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau found himself in a delicate position, needing to defend Canada's economic interests while avoiding a full-blown trade war that could have devastating consequences for both nations. The dispute was not just about economics, it was about principles. Canada stood firm in its advocacy for free trade, emphasizing the importance of open markets and fair competition. President Trump, however, argued that trade deficits were evidence of unfair treatment, particularly targeting Canada as a major contributor to the U.S. trade imbalance. In response, Canadian officials countered these claims, highlighting the balanced nature of the trade relationship and the mutual benefits it provided to both countries. The trade battle overshadowed other critical issues on the G7 agenda, creating an atmosphere of distrust and uncertainty among the participating nations. Despite the tensions, G7 leaders united in their efforts to persuade President Trump to reconsider his stance, warning of the potential global economic harm that a trade war could unleash. They emphasized the need for cooperation and dialogue to resolve differences and maintain stability in the international economic system. Before the G7 summit, Prime Minister Carney met President Trump in the Oval Office. The meeting tested U.S.-Canada relations with polite exteriors masking tension. Sharp exchanges on trade highlighted differing worldviews. Trump dominated the conversation, often diverting from trade topics. Carney struggled to maintain focus on key issues. Despite friction, both leaders maintained a friendly public image. Trump praised Carney's election victory, showing personal respect. The meeting ended without breakthroughs, revealing deep divisions. It previewed the challenges of the G7 summit, showcasing Trump's unpredictable style. Carney's calm, focused approach aimed to protect Canada's interests. A tense moment arose when Trump suggested Canada become the 51st U.S. state. For Canadians, this was deeply offensive, challenging their national identity. Prime Minister Carney firmly rejected the idea, defending Canada's sovereignty. Trump's economic arguments missed the importance of Canadian pride. Carney emphasized Canada's independence and investments in its own defense. The exchange highlighted fundamental differences in national values. For Trump, borders were negotiable. For Carney, sovereignty was sacred. This clash underscored Canada's distinct identity from its powerful neighbor. Meetings between Donald Trump and Mark Carney were more than just diplomatic events. They became vivid demonstrations of two fundamentally different leadership philosophies. Each encounter, whether in the White House or on the world stage, highlighted the stark contrast between their approaches to power, negotiation, and international relations. Trump's leadership style was unmistakable, bold, dominant, and often unpredictable. He was known for steering conversations in unexpected directions, sometimes catching other leaders off guard. His forceful rhetoric and energetic gestures commanded attention, but also introduced an element of uncertainty that could disrupt the flow of discussions. This unpredictability was both a tool and a challenge, as it kept allies and adversaries alike on their toes. In contrast, Carney's approach was measured and deliberate. He listened intently, focusing on the core issues at hand and working to keep negotiations on track. His calm, analytical demeanor allowed him to navigate complex situations with poise, ensuring that Canada's priorities remained front and center, even amid heated debates. Carney's brand of diplomacy was firm yet non-confrontational. He defended Canada's interests with quiet strength, choosing his words carefully to avoid unnecessary escalation. This approach earned him respect among peers and positioned him as a reliable, steady presence in international affairs. The contrast between Trump and Carney was especially evident during high-profile moments, such as Oval Office meetings and G7 summits. While Trump's larger-than-life persona often dominated the room, Carney's steady hand provided a counterbalance, reminding everyone of the value of patience and strategic thinking. Interestingly, Trump's disruptive tactics sometimes created opportunities for leaders like Carney to assert themselves. When discussions veered off course, Carney's ability to remain composed and refocus the conversation allowed him to carve out space for Canada's voice to be heard. Carney's calm demeanor and quiet confidence projected stability, both to his own country and to the international community. He became known as a leader who could be trusted to navigate turbulent waters without losing sight of his nation's values. These interactions highlighted not just personal differences but also broader questions about how best to navigate the complex world of diplomacy. Should a leader shake things up to force change or work steadily within established frameworks to protect national interests? Trump's boldness often challenged the status quo, pushing boundaries and demanding attention. Carney, meanwhile, focused on safeguarding Canada's values and interests, even when faced with unpredictable counterparts. Ultimately, the leadership clash between Trump and Carney became a story in itself, a vivid illustration of the many paths leaders can take on the world stage, and a reminder that diplomacy is as much about style as it is about substance. Tensions with Trump impacted Canadian politics, uniting the nation. Canadians rallied behind Carney's firm stance against U.S. pressure. Public support strengthened Carney's political standing. Defending sovereignty became a popular domestic position. The conflict with Trump boosted Carney's image as a strong leader. Opposition parties struggled to criticize Carney's defense of Canada. The U.S. conflict overshadowed other issues, focusing on Carney's leadership. The situation turned a foreign policy crisis into a domestic advantage. Managing Trump's unpredictability was a challenge for leaders like Carney. The 2018 G7 summit's memory made leaders cautious. Canada's chair summary strategy avoided public failures. The U.S. disruption created leadership opportunities for other nations. Countries formed stronger alliances, taking initiative on global issues. Canada boosted its international reputation by hosting the G7. Carney's firm stance showed Canada as a reliable partner. The chair summaries allowed Canada to control the summit narrative. This pragmatic approach protected G7 integrity and Canada's interests. Amid trade disputes, global security issues like Iran's nuclear program were crucial. Middle East tensions, especially between Israel and Iran, added urgency. G7 leaders united against a nuclear-armed Iran, seeking coordinated diplomacy. German Chancellor Merz led the group's stance on preventing Iran's nuclear ambitions. The G7 supported Israel's right to self-defense, emphasizing regional stability. Despite trade disagreements, the G7 found common ground on security. The summit highlighted the G7's role in addressing global challenges. Despite tensions, leaders maintained diplomatic politeness. Trump and Carney ended meetings with public statements of respect. Canada's Chair Summary's strategy presented a united front. This approach minimized public disputes, avoiding summit failure. Diplomatic decorum kept communication channels open. Politeness allowed continued engagement on critical issues. Diplomacy is a long game. Today's adversary might be tomorrow's partner. Maintaining civility ensures relationships survive stress. The Canada-US meetings exemplified this principle, keeping diplomacy alive.